Good morning. My name is Sarah Bentley, and I'm grateful to be with you today for our video devotion. We recently wrapped up our weekend series in the book of Ephesians, and one of the themes in Ephesians that has always stood out to me is the theme of hope. Hope that is rooted in the person of Jesus. What Jesus did on the cross, what Jesus accomplished by rising again from the dead, and this incredible inheritance we now have as children adopted into God's family when we choose to put our faith in Jesus. And as children adopted into God's family, we now have an ongoing invitation, this invitation to draw near to God, to know God personally. And with this invitation comes the promise that Jesus will carry our burdens. I mentioned burdens this morning because I know a lot of you watching this probably feel weary. Well, there's a well-known passage in Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30 that talks about weariness. Jesus says here, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, you probably know these verses. They're popular because I think they speak to a weariness all of us experience. But might I suggest these words of Jesus are more than just a comforting saying. Instead, I think if we truly understand Jesus' words here, we've actually landed on the very heart of the gospel. Because right here, Jesus starts by telling us what we all currently have. And what we all currently have is this restlessness we can't shake, a burden, a yoke that we can't fix or manage or get rid of. And the restlessness Jesus is talking about here is a spiritual restlessness. It's that unsettled, weighty feeling that comes from feeling like we need to prove ourselves in order to be accepted by God. It's the weight of guilt and anxiety that comes from thinking we have to perform for God to accept us. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Come if you are weary and burdened." He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." Implication, this yoke of spiritual restlessness affects us all. We also learn here that not only do we already carry a yoke, a burden, but that there's someone or something else in the yoke with us, because that's how a yoke works. Now, most of us have probably not seen a yoke in person, but it's a big wooden beam with two metal rings that hang off of it, and the beasts of burden, normally oxen, are pulling that yoke. And a yoke doesn't just burden you by keeping you attached to the weight of the yoke itself. It also burdens you by attaching you to whatever thing is in the yoke next to you. So you see, whatever you choose to attach yourself to in order to deal with the burden of your restlessness will keep you enslaved. We simply can't escape the reality that we're never in that yoke alone. And the other thing in that yoke with us will burden us unless we choose to attach ourselves to Jesus. Now Jesus moves on to issue an invitation in these verses. First, Jesus says, "You're invited to come and experience me." This is the invitation in verse 28 when Jesus says, "Come to me." Here we're reminded that when it comes to this deep and unending burden, this restlessness we carry with us, the first thing we need is Jesus. Jesus literally gives us himself. He wants you to experience the amazing freedom that comes from knowing him, but there's more. The second part to this invitation is this. Jesus says, not only do I want you to come and experience me, but you're invited to come and experience my gift of rest. Now, to understand this phrase, "I will give you rest," we need to go back and look at this yoke again. A yoke is that big wooden beam with the two metal rings, and there are animals in those rings, typically oxen. Now, usually the first ox is older and seasoned. He's trained and he's hardy from years of working under that yoke. But the second ox is usually younger. He has potential, but he's inexperienced. And the idea is that by sharing the same yoke, the inexperienced younger ox learns from the older ox next to him. But not only does the older ox lead by example, but because he's usually bigger physically in size, he also bears the load. The weight of the yoke literally rests on his shoulders. This then frees up the younger ox to simply follow alongside and focus on learning without actually having to bear the weight of that burden. There's a powerful picture here that Jesus is painting for us. Jesus wants us to know that he's in the yoke with us and he is shouldering the burden of our sin, our shame, our inadequacy squarely on his shoulders so that we're then freed up to simply learn from him. Ultimately, the bottom line is this: Jesus is in the yoke with us, beside us, and that leaves us with relentless hope. Hope that comes from knowing that we don't have to bear the weight of our burdens alone. I hope that that encourages you today. I'm so grateful you took the time to join me.